so this is multiplying integers and exponents. So put today's date on there, 11/3. Okay, so really quick review, multiplication rules. Silly way to remember multiplication rules. Birds of a feather flock together, fill that in. Which means, birds of a feather means that people that are alike tend to hang out together. So if you multiply with the same signs, the answer is always positive. All right, second multiplication rule, oil and water don't mix, which means that people that have really, really different personalities tend to grate on each other. They don't get along very well. If you multiply with different signs, the answer is always negative. Oil and water don't mix. Now, most of what we've done so far has been multiplying double signs. We're now going to get into actually multiplying numbers. So the best way to do it is to start by multiplying the signs and then do the numbers like separately in two separate steps in your head. So for example, on this one, you have a negative times a positive. Oil and water don't mix. It's going to be a negative. And then multiply the numbers. 2 times 5 is 10. So the answer is negative 10. All right, example 2, negative times a negative. Birds of a feather flock together. It's going to be a positive. And then multiply 3 times 7 is 21. Example 3, multiplying fractions. When you multiply fractions, you do not need a common denominator. You just multiply straight across. So I have a negative 1 times a positive 3. Oil and water don't mix. It's going to be a negative. 1 times 3 is 3 on the top. On the bottom, 2 times 7 is 14. So you just multiply the tops and the bottoms. All right, let's talk about exponents. Exponents are a way to write multiple numbers multiplied together without having to write them a bunch of times. Math people are lazy. We like shortcuts. So a negative 4 to the power of 2 means there are 2 negative 4s being multiplied together. The small number just tells you how many are there. So when you write it as multiplication, you can see how your multiplication rules are going to fit. A negative times a negative, birds of a feather flock together. It's a positive. 4 times 4 is 16. All right, now, example 2, I put this one on so that you could contrast it with this one. In this one, the negative and the 4 are in parentheses, so when you square it, it's a negative 4 and a negative 4. This one's different. This will mess with your head a little bit. This negative is not in parentheses, so what it means is there is a negative 1 times a 2 cubed. That negative is actually a negative 1. It's not being cubed at all. So the negative 1 parks out front, and then 2 to the power of 3 means you have 3 2's multiplied together. Now, to multiply several numbers, you do it just like you would normally. You multiply the first 2. A negative times a positive is a negative. Oil and water don't mix. 1 times 2 is 2. I'm just recopying the other 2's, and you just keep going to the right. So the next 2. A negative times a positive is a negative. 2 times 2 is 4. Keep going to the right. A negative times a positive is a negative, and 4 times 2 is 8. So you just go left to right, multiplying or dividing until you get to the end. All right, let's look at number 3. This one has a negative in front and in parentheses. So the negative in front becomes a negative 1, and it's being multiplied by negative 3 cubed. So this one's like number 1. The negative is inside parentheses. So when you cube it, it's going to be negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. The negative gets cubed with the 3. Now, here's another way you can multiply. You can go left to right, or you can do what we call chunking. Chunking is where you multiply these two, and then you multiply them times each other, which sometimes works if you have a lot of numbers. So if we multiply the first two, a negative times a negative is a positive, and 1 times 3 is 3. And then multiply the second two. A negative times a negative is a positive, and 3 times 3 is 9. And then you multiply them together. 3 times 9 is 27. So you can multiply left to right or chunk if it's all just being multiplied. All right, last one of these. I have a negative 3. And then a negative 5 squared. In order of operations, exponents go first, which means you have to do this part first. So I have a negative 3, and then the part we're going to do first is the negative 5 times the negative 5. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive. 5 times 5 is 25. I've done the exponent. Bring over the negative 3. Now I multiply those. A positive times a negative is a negative, and 25 times 3 is 75. So you got to first do exponent and then multiply. That's your order of operations. Now, I'm going to show you a pattern that will save you a lot of headaches. This is a pattern. If I take a negative 2 to the power of 2, that would be a negative 2 times negative 2, which is a positive 4. If I cube it, negative 2, negative 2, negative 2, what happens is the first two become positive, but then when you multiply it by the third one, it becomes a negative 8. Let's do another one, and then I'll see if you can spot the pattern. Negative 3 squared is negative 3 times negative 3, which is positive 9. Negative 3 cubed is 3 negative 3's in a row. A negative times a negative is a positive. A positive times the third negative is a negative 27. So what you can see is that the 2 that we squared turned out positive. The 2 that we cubed turned out negative. That's a pattern. The pattern is if you take a negative number to an even power of any kind, the answer is always positive. If you take a negative number to an odd power, no matter what it is, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 101, it's going to be always negative. So, if I have a negative 1 to the power of 103, is my answer going to be positive or negative?
Positive. No. Yeah. Negative 1 to the
Is 103 even or an odd number? Odd. And a negative number to an odd power is always negative. I mean, negative 1. If I gave you a negative 1 to the power of 200, what's going to be the sign on that number?
positive.
Yep, positive 1. That's one of the ones they like to put on your state test because it's not one you have time to write out. It's one that you have to know what the pattern is. All right, are there any questions?